I started the Real Mental podcast because it bugs me when film and TV miss the mark about how mental health gets portrayed. Real Mental is a podcast where a film-loving psychiatrist, that's me, talks to a film critic to help people figure out their lives by getting to the truth about mental health in the movies. Welcome, Shane Conto, to the Real Mental podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. Looking forward to chat another movie with you.
Yeah, well, this movie is, as I was saying to you before we started, I just really loved it. And the more I sit with it, the more layers I feel it has that we can get into. So I'm going to let you start first, and you can share, your impressions of the movie first. Oh, first we have to say the movie is.
Yes.
Go
We're
ahead.
going to be talking about The Holdovers, which this is a film from director Alexander Payne, who I've been a fan of for a while now. I'm a huge fan of The Descendants that he had come out, which really deals with grief and trying to process that, and Nebraska election sideways. He's had a lot of great films, and it had been a little while since he had a film come out. And I was excited when I saw the trailer for this, and The Holdovers focuses on basically it's a trio of unexpected people who get stuck at a prep school during the holidays because they don't have anywhere else to go. And just the journey that these three very, very different people, this journey that they go on, finding connection with each other, finding solace with each other, is such a great experience. And one of the things that I love most about this film is this really does take you back to like this. You start watching the film, this takes place 1970. It has very specific ties to that time period. One of the characters' sons died in Vietnam, and it's that kind of era too. And what's so great about the film, Payne and the cinematographer for the film really worked on Igor Beard really tried to create a look that felt like this was a vintage film. They even went as far as creating an old school Focus Feature logo that didn't exist because Focus Feature didn't exist in the 70s. So they created all the logos for the production companies and everything. There's a graininess to the look of the film. The music really, really works as well. The production design, the costuming, it really takes you to this specific place and time. Even like the popular music choices that they use, because like I grew up listening to older music for sure, listening to 60s, 70s music. And I remember the trailer. I'm like, these are some great songs that they have in this trailer. And they use them in the movie too, which is also great. And just the atmosphere of it. But what really anchors this film is just three actors that are putting so much into these characters, and obviously anchored by Paul Giamatti, who's getting a lot of awards buzz for his performance as Paul Hunnam, who's, he's been teaching at this school for a long time. He was a student at this school. And you have a sense that there's a lot more to his connection to this school as the film goes on. And obviously, as the film goes on, you find out more about his experience. But he's cranky. He seems to have a chip on his shoulder. He's specifically there to challenge the students. And in particular, especially the ones that are there on their parents' dime who probably really shouldn't be there. And he gets stuck with this young kid who he really doesn't understand. Like, he doesn't know what this young man, Angus, played by Dominic Sessa, whose first film this is, his whole entire experience going through being stuck here, basically being abandoned by his mother, replaced by his new stepfather for the holidays. And then you have the cook, Mary, played by Divine Joy Randolph, who is going through a lot. Her son has died. She's in this place where a lot of people don't really respect her, and you feel that. And just their journey throughout this film is so inspiring. And then as the film goes on, you find so many layers to these characters and their dynamics and what they're really going through. And just, I remember watching this film. I got to see this back in early November. I took a trip with my friends in New York City to go check it out. So I've been sitting on this for a couple months now, and it still sits with me and it's still one of my favorite films of 2023.
I know. I really liked it when I saw it, and now I
Mhm,
can say I really love it,
mhm.
and I think that the acting was so spectacular. Paul Giamatti is an expert at playing these very difficult,
Yes.
troubled characters, but he captured so much nuance because he was portraying this man who has all this backstory, and
Mhm.
a lot of it kind of gradually emerged over the film, but right from the start he was showing it, and so you could go back and go, okay, so that's why he's so hard on the legacy kids, and that's
Yeah.
why he's such a stickler, because he went to Harvard on a scholarship and his roommate plagiarized, and because he was a rich legacy kid, he blamed Paul Hunnam, and Hunnam got upset and assaulted him, and then he got booted out of Harvard and lost his career prospects and was, really shamed, and then
Mhm.
ended up out of the goodness of somebody's heart going back to his prep school as a teacher, but really with his tail between his legs. And you see that rage, that indignation, that sense of injustice, especially by a certain type of person who he
Yes.
despises. And so he has to teach these students who represent everything that he finds evil in the world.
Mhm. And I cannot imagine, like, the feeling of having your whole life shattered, because of something that's completely out of your hands, because of somebody else's privilege, and then your only real prospect is to go back and then teach a whole bunch of those same kids year after year. And I think that's one of the most interesting elements of his relationship with Angus at first, because on some level, I feel like Paul assumes so many of them are the same kind of kid. And the more they spend time together, the more that they learn from each other and realizing that they honestly have a lot more in common than they think they do at first. And it really helps break down those barriers because Paul feels like he has so many walls built up around him and he has a chip on his shoulder all the time. And he's not afraid to be sarcastic and give people a hard time. And Paul Giamatti is so good in those moments and being so cantankerous with so many people in this movie. And this film is so funny, but there's so much more depth than just getting some fun laughs for a holiday movie. Because on the surface, you could think about this film as like, this is a fun, quirky kind of holiday comedy, but there's just so much emotion and so much trauma that all these characters have been through. And Paul's journey throughout this film, and like those awkward moments where they're in Boston, which I loved that diversion that the characters went on. It's like, Screw being stuck at this school this whole entire time and taking this trip to Boston and him running into peers, former peers of his, and him putting on the face. Because the whole entire film, Paul's very upfront about how he is, but in that moment, there's that insecurity coming back through of what if I'm going to get judged for what happened to me when I was in college, and trying to protect himself from that was so interesting. And good for Angus for jumping right on board and helping him with that. And I feel like those are the small moments in the film where their connection grows, is that they, even though they don't seem to like each other at first, they're still willing to jump in and have their back, whether it's running into an old colleague or seemingly starting a fight at a bar because of some kind of game that you insist on playing when other people want to butt in. And that kind of dynamic, those are the great little moments that happen throughout this film.
Yeah, there's a profound sense of empathy among the three main characters. And,
Mhm.
you started out saying that these characters are very, very different, and they are on the surface. But when scrape a little bit beneath the surface, you see how much they have in common. For example, when I look at Mary's character, the cook,
Mhm.
and Paul, they're both drinking too much. And why
Yes.
are they drinking? They're drinking to self medicate
Mhm.
their unhappiness. Mary has this acute grief and she feels so alone, and her sister is pregnant and starting a new family, and she's just lost her only child. And so she is devastated and maybe doubly devastated because she, her sister is happily married. She has a child on the way, and Mary has nothing. She's
Yeah.
lost her one beloved son in Vietnam because of a lack of privilege, for the same reason that Paul hates these students. Her son, because he's Black and poor, did not have an opportunity. He didn't get the scholarship he needed to pay for university, so he had to enlist. And so she's grieving and drinking, and Paul is grieving his lost opportunities and
Mhm.
his resentment of these privileged kids, and he's drinking. So, they have so much in common, and they're both, able to empathize with each other. And she right away is empathizing with the young man because he's like a son to her,
Yeah.
same age. And eventually Paul comes around and is able to empathize with the young man. So it's like this beautiful kind of flowering of mutual empathy, one among the other. And it starts out with such animosity and it ends
Mhm.
up with such compassion, but it's not like a trick. In many movies, I find that the transition between one emotion and another feels completely artificial and sudden, and it doesn't have any context. And I go, this would never happen in real life. Whereas in this movie, it's so well crafted and so well acted that you see how the psychology is believable. So when Paul's character starts off as a curmudgeon and ends up as a compassionate, empathetic person, and when Mary's character, starts off as stoic and then she has her little breakdown and then she realizes, okay, I'm going to go connect with my family. All of these transitions are believable. And when the young man, Angus, starts out as just this completely acting out rebellious kid because he feels so abandoned by his mother, who's, decided that she prefers her new husband to him, his transition is also so beautiful because he's able to really see the humanity in Mary and see the humanity in his teacher. So, like, all of these transitions are believable. Did you find the same thing?
It's very interesting because give a little bit bigger perspective on film at the moment. There's a lot of discourse about like run times of movies. As like, why is every movie turning out to be like 2.5, 3 hours now? And you would at first glance wonder why this film's 2 hours and 13 minutes. But there's a reason, and it's because they need to have those small moments. Because without those small moments, it would be exactly like you said, where it's hitting specific beats and tropes of a film like this to get to a place. But those small moments, like I love the scene where Paul and Mary are just sitting and watching the dating game, which not a show it seems like on the surface Paul would enjoy at all because he's uber intellectual, but he seems also like a little petty and he seems to enjoy the little drama about it. And that's the fun little moments of the two of them connecting. And you notice they're both sitting there drinking their sorrows away together, watching the dating game, which also has some other layers to why Mary's watching that, especially when it's like she has no relationship, she has nobody at that point. And those scenes might seem like they're just padding the runtime, but it's making this whole entire journey so organic. And this film feels so authentic and never feels like it's just playing on cheap tropes. And I give a lot of credit to David Hemmingson, who wrote the screenplay for this film, to take the time to write scenes like that and for the actors to really sell them. And the big moment for, say, Mary later in the film when she finally visits. And her sister always wanted her to be there. You can tell that. But Mary didn't feel like she could be there because of the place that she's in. And like the little moments of her being alone in the room and like leaving the gift that she has and everything, just those little moments that take a couple minutes of a film's runtime but add so much depth to the characters and the journey. And that's one of the things that I love most about this film because these are all very interesting and engaging characters, and all the performances are really committed, but they feel so real, these people, and being able to go on this journey. And it takes a little bit to get to the point where it's the three of them because, the holdover time starts off with a group of kids. And then, because of unfortunate circumstances, Angus still gets stuck there. And then Paul is stuck there. and Mary is stuck there, and they're all at least Paul and Angus are very begrudging to the point where they're stuck there. And the whole entire reason Paul's there in the first place is because somebody else lies and plays some games and leverages privilege to get out of the situation. And Paul's just the one left with this all hanging on him. And as the film progresses, and by the end, in some way it's very costly for Paul, this whole journey and how it goes. But on another level, it's the most important thing that happened to him in his life in a long time. And that's a impactful thing to be able to say by the end of a film, that it's like we watch these characters go on probably the most significant experience of their lives up to this point. And I think that's definitely true about Paul and Angus in terms of like the journey that they go on.
And now let's pause for a quick word about my other podcast. I'm Dr. Marcia Sirota. We all need to be inspired and uplifted these days. We need a good laugh and we need to be moved. In the Ruthless Compassion podcast, I speak with a wonderfully diverse group of people. They've overcome daunting obstacles and they're making unique, exciting contributions to our communities and to our world. The Ruthless Compassion podcast is at 145 episodes and counting. Why not have a listen to it today? Yeah, and I love that journey of Paul because he was living, but he wasn't really living. He was
Mm,
just subsisting, and he was so bitter and so resentful and so full of rage and so full of self-loathing because he knew that, what he was doing was not good for him. And he got to be the better version of himself in the
mhm.
end. Even though it cost him, but it was like a velvet prison, right? It cost him his
Yep.
velvet prison and he broke himself free. And, who knows what is possible for him, but we are hopeful because we feel that he has found himself again. He has found his core of humanity, and Angus and Mary have kind of enabled him to access that. The empathy broke him open, broke down the walls, and enabled him to be the man that he could have been if he hadn't gone through so much of those awful traumas. And with Angus, he's also so angry. These
Yep.
two angry men in very different circumstances. He's so enraged about being, thrown over by his mother for her new husband. And he's so enraged about what happened to his own father. And he's so confused about his role in his family. He's so hurting. And he just lashes out very much like Paul Hunnam. He just keeps lashing out and lashing out. And faced with the compassion of Mary, who just, basically mothers him over the
Mhm.
holidays and is like, the mother he wishes he could have. And, obviously, as a good mother, she knows how to be a mom, and she
Mhm.
gets to remember, which is so beautiful, what it's like to mother. And with the compassion of Paul Hunnam and how he is able to make sacrifices on behalf of this kid, which is again what a good parent would do, this young man is able to recognize that, okay, maybe I'm not going to get what I need from my mother and my father and my stepfather, but there are people who can love me and care for me, and I don't have to be so angry and I don't have to be so self-destructive. And he has this big aha, and I think he's going to be
Mhm.
just fine. And you just feel like this encounter has transformed him. And Mary, I think what it did was, she was in such heartbreak that she shut down and she had a breakdown at a
Mhm.
party, a
Yep.
Christmas party. And then it's like, okay, she's going to let in love again. So everybody had a moment where they had a big, huge shift. And it felt completely, like you say, real, natural, organic.
Yeah, and I think especially starting with Mary, I feel like she's the only one out of the 3 of them that I really feel like had true love and happiness at some point in her life. And her situation just is, and I'm not meaning to say like just this, but it's like she's trying to get past something that happened and she stopped moving forward in her life. And I love that she reaches the point and she realizes that there's other people caring, and even like a small moment where one of the other jerk kids criticized her cooking, which at this point her job's all that she has. And the way that Paul stands up for her was really impactful, and that was one of the first moments you see Paul actually caring about somebody, and that was a really nice moment. And getting to see Mary, who's going to get to enjoy her niece or nephew. I can't recall if it was a boy or girl, but being able to appreciate her family again and being there and a part of that. And, she has somebody who likes her and potentially having some romance in her life too, which is nice. And then I really do think that the journey that Angus goes on, which, quick side note, his stepdad might have been in like one scene in this whole entire movie, but Stanley's one of my least favorite characters in any movie in 2023. I hated Stanley from the one scene that he's in this movie. And Tate Donovan, who's like a really talented like Broadway actor, just shows up for one scene and just make him hate him so bad because he's so selfish and he's so disconnected and elitist about his perspective on the world. And you can tell he doesn't care about Angus at all, has disdain, probably feels like he's a barrier between him and his new wife. And what Angus goes on in this film, the whole journey with him trying to see his father, that whole entire process in which this taking place in 1970 also makes a lot of sense in terms of the horrible situation that it's like, well, person has mental illness, let's just lock them away and never talk about them again. And that whole situation, and that was heartbreaking. That sequence with him trying to connect with his father in that way, but it's such an important journey for him to realize. And by the end, after this film is over, the events of this film, that he's going to make real connections at that school. He's going to make real connections moving forward because he could finally get past the fact that he can connect with other people, even if his own family isn't there for him. And a lot of these characters had something hanging on them at the beginning of the film, and that's the thing that's been hanging on him, is that lack of connection with his own family, and now him being able to connect with others. And I'm so hopeful and happy for Angus at the end, and he looks like a changed person. And I love the dynamic that he develops with Paul, even down to the whole little thing with the which eye do I look at, was probably one of my favorite little things about the film. And the fact that Paul finally gives into it and actually gives him an answer was so funny, and also meant so much more than just like a cheap laugh, because what it actually meant in terms of them connecting with each other.
Yeah, and, when I think about it psychologically, I think, Angus came in at the beginning and he felt like he wasn't lovable and he
Mhm.
felt like there wouldn't be anybody there for him. And he learned that, in fact, he was lovable and that there would be people there for him. Paul came in feeling like, people were horrible. They were all, selfish and corrupt and awful. And, he could just hate everybody. And despite himself, he came to love Mary and he came to love Angus and he came to, really put their needs and feelings ahead of his own, which was just remarkable, and really become a human being in that moment, to be courageous and to be self-sacrificing and to be humane. And Mary, she felt like it was all done for her. It was all over. She'd lost everything and, there was nothing more for her. And it's like her heart softened and she became receptive to letting love in, letting in her family, her sister, her new nephew, I think it was, who
Yep.
she was going to make a scholarship for, right?
Mhm.
The scholarship she wanted to have given to her son, and to have, the possibility of a boyfriend. So it's like everybody started out with this belief about themselves and their lives. And through those very small scenes, as you talked about, those very small but very important scenes, because that's how we humans evolve. We have these moments with one another, these moments of connection, of revelation, one by one, and they add up like little building blocks until we have a change. And so this film, created those little moments so that each
Mhm.
character could have a real significant change. And I love the fact that each character had a change. It wasn't just one, it wasn't just the main
Mhm.
character, that everybody got to change in a positive way. And yes, there were costs and yes, there were some sadness, but ultimately, like as you say, it was a tremendously hopeful film because they all regained something. They gained something so important by the end of the film. And when you're talking about the eye, just for context, so the character Paul Hunnam has, an eye issue where one eye kind of
Mhm.
goes off in one direction and the other eye goes off in the other. So, this kid Angus is giving him a hard time. He's giving him the gears and saying, which eye do I look at? And,
Yeah.
and in the sense, Paul knows that he's just, sticking it to him. So he's not going to answer the question. But then when Angus asks it again, Paul realizes that really what he wants to know is, how can I look you in the eye and really like face you like
Mhm.
one human to another? And at that point, Paul says, okay, this eye, because this is how we can look eye to eye and
Mhm.
face each other as two human beings. So, it started out as a dig, and it ended up as an opportunity for connection. So I love that they can turn this joke into something profound. And I think that's like the height of art, right? When you can
Mhm.
take something that started out as an insult and it's actually a moment of connection.
Yeah, this and we've talked a lot about the deep emotional resonance of this film, but also what's so great about it is it's a legitimately funny and fun movie to watch. And just the image of Paul Giamatti chasing Dominic Sessa through the school. And like Paul Giamatti is a smaller and his character is exaggerated with a lot of health issues. So like he's not like a really healthy man, and just trying to watch him chase this teenager through the school is legitimately funny, and then leads to that shock moment of him like completely dislocating his shoulder. And I love that shot, and they had it in the trail of just this really close up of Paul Giamatti's like mortified face. And that obviously led to a whole entire scene where they had to come up with a story together. And that's the interesting thing about the two of them is they really connected a lot on like messing with people and coming up with fabrications together. And those are the moments where you realize it's like they're kind of the same person in many ways, and they really have a lot in common and they can connect in that way. One of the things that I really appreciate, because Paul is the main character of the film, and like awards wise, they're pushing for Paul Giamatti. He's the lead. Dominic Sessa and Divine Joy Randolph are supporting. Paul Giamatti is not a traditional leading man. Because, there's actors like you could see George Clooney, who is talented and honestly a lot more fun when he is doing quirky character work. But like he could just pop into a movie and be suave and charismatic and look like George Clooney, and it works. But what I love about Paul Giamatti is everything that he brings to a role, all the tiny things that he brings to a role. And he's so committed, and there's just so much emotion and layers to everything that he brings, like the eye thing, the way he walks, the way he gets in and out of bed, like because they take the time to show them getting in and out of bed in this film, and it just shows you like all the little intricate things that he puts into this character because he feels so real. Like you might have had a teacher like this at some point, and he lives in history. Like I took Latin for 5 years. My Latin teacher was nothing like Paul at all, but like learning so much about ancient history and stuff like that, there's a handful of people you're going to meet that are really interested in it. And you can tell like none of these kids are for the most part. And they're just like, why am I learning this? And Paul kind of feeds off that. You could tell he has a lot of fun. He's having so much fun for himself in his engagement with his students. And I definitely find myself in moments like I'll say certain things that it's 100% for my own enjoyment, because you have to enjoy life sometimes, and sometimes you have to make that own enjoyment for yourself. And then the flip side to that is that's really all Paul has. And then you think that's really sad. And then that's the journey, because that's where it all starts is basically this is a cranky older man that just likes to mess with his students, and that seems like the only joy that he gets out of life. And by the end, there's so much more to Paul and to these characters. I just loved getting lost in this film. And with some of the friends that I went to go see this film with, some of them complained a bit about like how long it felt and stuff like that. I honestly enjoyed every scene from scene to scene and never felt like I was losing the film or getting left behind and losing interest, because it committed so much to you connecting with these characters.
Yeah, I felt I wanted to hang out with those people. Like, I was
Mhm,
happy to hang out with them, to go on every scene with them, to go to the Christmas party,
mhm.
where Paul's potential love interest was hosting and the revelations there. I was happy
Oh,
to, watch them go to Boston together and, the ups and the downs of that. I was
mhm,
happy to have them have their holiday dinner together when they came back. Like, I was happy to go on every scene with them because, the film was so well done that you just love those characters as much as they antagonize you and they exasperate you. You love them, like, you really
mhm,
love them. And the film, it was so wonderful, like that empathy, because not only did they have empathy for one another, but I felt such a tremendous affinity for them. I just loved each one of them so much. I could be each of their pals. And I felt like I wanted to hang out with them. It didn't feel long at all to me. When you told me it was 2.25 hours, I was like, really? Didn't feel that long,
no,
because I just felt like, yeah, let's just hang out together. Because when you really like somebody, right? When you really enjoy someone's company, it doesn't feel like you're spending a long time together.
mm-mm,
The time flies by because you're having such a good time. And I think that's how this movie felt to me. And I wonder if the people who complained about it being long, if they didn't let themselves connect on an emotional level, right? Because everything is so superficial and stimulating these days with social media, that they're used to skimming the surface. And so this movie is not that kind of movie. You got to
mm,
really, invest emotionally and let yourself feel the feelings, open your heart and feel the feeling, because then if you do, you're going to want to hang out with these characters. And like, I would be very happy to watch this film and hang out with those characters again because I enjoyed them so much. So yeah, to me, if you love them and want to spend time with them, it doesn't feel like a long time at all.
absolutely, and there's a handful of films that I can think of off the top of my head where I'm like, I wanna be friends with these characters. I wanna
Yeah.
spend time with these characters. I would have had a blast with Paul Angus and Mary on this journey, and I had a blast vicariously watching them too, which adds to the situation that we're in. And I do want to hit on one thing that you brought up in terms of the connections build off of the little things. And I had a moment, one of my friends just bought an apartment and he had like a housewarming and he made a comment about his memory of first meeting me. And he brought up a couple of completely random, tiny things that seemed so odd that that would be the start of a friendship. But that's how it is. And you have those little moments. And that's what I appreciated so much about like those key moments in this film that you see them really building those connections are a couple of strange little interactions and little things about them connecting. And, we see some of them failing to connect with other people. And, that revelation that Paul has at that party with the host, that hurt. Like, that hurt me sitting and watching the movie. And I'm like, no. And then that whole party hurt because you see Angus finally making a connection, and you're just like, this could go somewhere. But then they're kind of ripped out of the situation, and maybe something can happen in the future. Paul getting kind of let down and disappointed. And then obviously that was Mary's big turning point moment of having that breakdown in the kitchen. That was just heartbreaking, like heartbreaking to watch. And, there's so many scenes, whether it's that scene or when they went out to the restaurant and they wouldn't sell them the dessert, and then they tried to do it yourself in the parking lot. And just like all those little things. I saw this movie at the beginning of November, and I haven't rewatched it since. And I still very distinctly remember all these things. And honestly, right now makes me want to go hop on Peacock where it's streaming right now and go rewatch this movie because it was so fantastic.
Yeah, and when you think about, how do you make art to touch the heart, right? How do you make art that speaks a truth, a human truth? And I think a lot of filmmakers mistakenly think they have to have the big moments, the big, big moments, the
Mhm.
big, exciting, explosive, dramatic moments, whether it's a superhero movie or some drama. But as you said so astutely, it's not that. An accumulation of small moments that, build like a string of beads, that they build and build and build, and then you get this whole necklace, and it's meaningful. And then you see the whole that's greater than the sum of the parts. But all
Mhm.
those little small moments, which, like you said with your friend, are so true, because I also remember people saying to me, I really knew that I wanted to, work with you, when I was doing a lot more psychotherapy. I knew I wanted to work with you when you said this sentence, blah, blah. And I went like, I don't even remember saying that. And they said, oh, but that was so meaningful to me. Or, a person in my personal life who said, yeah, when you said to me this thing, I knew, yeah, we're going to be together, and, we're going to be friends for a really long time. I was like, wow, I just said that off the cuff. I didn't even think. So there are little moments that we don't even necessarily take as seriously or don't
Mhm.
necessarily remember. But those are the real life moments that really matter to the people in our lives. And in this movie, the filmmakers understood that, and they just kept populating it with moment after moment of very small but real interactions that added up and added up and added up and created something very beautiful.
Absolutely, and Alexander Payne certainly understands that really well, and I love Sideways. I particularly love Descendants and
Yeah.
Nebraska and all the strange little moments that you remember from those films that are so offbeat and weird, but they're just people being people and having the most awkward interactions. Like, I just particularly in The Descendants, like, that's a hard film to process watching this man go through a really hard time of processing the eventual death of his wife and all of the baggage that he finds out at that moment about his own relationship. And a film like that, that should be, it's like, well, that sounds depressing. Well, there's so many little moments of being human that you find in his interacting with different characters and such. And in this film, if you told me like there's three traumatized people stuck in a school together over Christmas by themselves, that sounds horrible. That sounds depressing. But it's being able to find the joy and the connection in it all. And that's what this film does. And this is definitely going to be one of those movies that I would love to go back to during the holidays every year. And I can't think of, for me personally, like a holiday film like this that I from recently the past at least 5-10 years that I want to go back and watch. Usually it's like things that I watched when I was a kid or something like this, but this one really left an impression on me, and I hope that more and more people discover a film like this around the holidays when it keeps popping up, because it also has that whole layer to it. And there's a lot of people that struggle through the holidays not having those connections, and then being able to connect with a film and being able to connect with characters like this can be something special to latch on to.
Yeah, because ultimately this film is very hopeful, right?
Mhm,
It shows that we can change. It shows that we can open our hearts and let in love. It shows that we can transcend our false beliefs about ourselves and each other, and, be more connected and have more empathy. So it's a hopeful film on a human level, and it's hopeful if we can, as audience members, look at this film and go, okay, if those characters are able to have a better life and feel better and make room for love, maybe we can too. So
mhm.
I think it models something very positive. And it's interesting because it's set in quite a dark time. It's set in the
Yeah.
middle, as you say, of the Vietnam War. And, there's a lot of racism, there's a lot of bad
Mhm,
stuff. And sure enough, we're back in a bad time with war and racism and more bad stuff, and democracy on the verge and, on the brink. And so it's showing that, we are capable of being our better selves. We are capable of rising to the occasion of having a greater humanity. And, I think it's also a call to action. I think it's a call to say, look, these are dark times, but we can be kind to one another. We can
mhm.
be loving, and we can see better within each other than what we might have previously thought.
Well, I think that definitely hits in terms of, 54 years later, like from when this movie is set, still feels just as relevant. And pretty sad that we're still in a situation like that, but that is where that hope from the film, and this film is really hopeful, and that's probably the biggest thing that I love about it is knowing that we can connect with people on a deep way, in a deep emotional level, and come from different perspectives, come from different experiences. And, they have their own little makeshift family that they go on this journey with, the three of them. And, I'll certainly be coming back to this journey again and again because it's that kind of film that makes me want to do that.
Yeah, and like you're saying, they're showing us that family doesn't have to be a mother, a father, and kid. It can be just, a bunch of people who want to spend time together and who can
Mhm.
open their hearts to one another.
Absolutely.
Well, Shane, I would love for you to share where people can find you so that they can, look at all the work that you're doing.
Absolutely. So, most important thing is you could head over to the Wasteland Reviewer Instagram page where I shamelessly plug everything that I do from my different podcasts to the different places that I write, like sifpop.com, Knock on Wood Film, and GuyAtTheMovies.com. I do a lot of podcasts, Subscribe Magazine. But the thing that's most important to me is the Wasteland Reviewer YouTube channel. Been doing this now for going on 8 years. And I review so many different kinds of things, mostly film, television, love to read as well. And I have weekly shows. So go check those out.
That sounds great. Well, again, it's been a pleasure talking with you about a film that we both really, really enjoyed. And hopefully now more people will go out and, support it because I think it really deserves the eyeballs because it's really quite a beautiful, beautiful film. And it was really so fun to talk to you about it today.
Absolutely.
This is Dr. Marcia Sirota. Thanks for listening to the Real Mental Podcast. Please leave a review and your comments wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget to sign up for my free newsletter at marciasirotamd.com. While you're at it, why not check out my Ruthless Compassion podcast with over 140 episodes and counting? And if you have any ideas for guests for either Real Mental or Ruthless Compassion podcasts, please email us at info@marciasirotamd.com. Happy listening!